All right, welcome back. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that exports from Nigeria to the United States will now be subjected to a 14% tariff. The decision, which was made public during a Make America Wealthy Again event in the Rose Garden on Wednesday, in part of a broader strategy aimed at rebalancing global trade and addressing perceived unfair trade practices. The newly introduced 14% tariff marks a significant shift in U.S.-Nigeria trade relations, with the U.S. government citing an ongoing trade imbalance. According to Trump's administration, Nigeria imposes a 27% tariff on U.S. exports, a disparity the U.S. claims it has long been detrimental to American businesses and consumers. So on the show today, let's analyze what this means for us as a country and, importantly, our trade relations with the U.S. Joining me right about now is none other than our guest, Dr. Bamidele Ayemibo, is a trade expert. So good to have you on the show. Hello, Bamidele, can you hear me? Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Okay, good afternoon. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well, thank you. So help us understand how this news came to you. I know you are big on trade matters. How did this news come to you when you heard about the 14% tariff on Nigerian goods exports from into the US? How did it come to you?
Initially, my reaction was the fact that Nigeria is about losing about 10% of the export market where it currently sells the goods leaving Nigeria. But when I took a second look at the data, I realized that it might be a blessing in disguise, but if we do what we need to do, because the data, eventually when I have to dig deep into the data that I'll probably discuss in the course of this conversation, I realized that we actually might be at an advantage after all. But we still have to do what we need to do to be able to take advantage of that. Because at the end of the day, the 14% might not be really very bad the way I thought when I saw it before. Because we had AGOA before and we didn't maximize AGOA anyway. But that was supposed to give us duty-free access. Now we have 14%. And I was looking at the fact that might make us not be competitive. But looking at what other countries are going to be charged, we might just become competitive for a number of products, which we'll discuss in the course of the conversation. So initially, it looked like we're looking at doing about 10% of our trade, because we are doing about $6 billion in trade, out of about $60 billion trade Nigeria is doing in export. About 10% of that going to the US. But now we might be able to increase it on a second look at the data, because it looks like we will be able to be more competitive than some other countries that were having that market before.
Bamidele, what does this really mean? Let's start off with educating the audience to understand what this 14% tariff really means coming from the U.S. Help us understand this in 60 seconds. What does this really mean?
So if you're importing to Nigeria, for example, as an importer, you will pay what is called duty. The duty is a percentage of the value of the goods, usually a CIF price. That's the total value of the goods. The cost of the goods, the cost of the insurance, and the cost of freight. If you are bringing it to Nigeria. Now, if you are shipping to the US, if your good is worth $100,000, the buyer in the US will be paying $14,000 to clear the good in the US. Now, if the same good is coming from China, an importer in the US import from China will be paying $34,000, where Nigeria will be paying $14,000 for them to clear the good. So what that means is that the same good coming from China and from Nigeria, the Chinese goods are going to be more expensive than Nigerian goods. However, that is to the extent that if Nigerian production is also efficient enough such that, because generally our product, the same product from Nigeria, from China to the US, generally Nigeria will be more expensive because they produce more efficiently than us. But now you can see about 20% difference. Our is 14, there is 34, 20% difference. So this will give us an advantage in that market because the buyer will be paying $34,000 on $100,000 goods, but for Nigerian product, you will be paying $14,000 on a $100,000 good. And that should put Nigeria in a better place compared to its Chinese counterpart for that same item.
Right, so I'm happy you're doing a comparison between Nigeria and China. What are the downsides for us here? There are other countries that are also being levied. I don't know if Nigeria is still about the lowest levied by the US. But then what are the downsides for us? You did mention that it came to you as you thought it was a bad thing, but after analyzing the data, you realize it could be a blessing in disguise. How could this be a blessing in disguise when we have not been able to ramp up production of virtually anything except oil? Even oil,
okay.
Even oil, we are still grappling with the figures.
Very valid concern. So let me highlight 10 top products that Nigeria currently exports to the US. Crude petroleum, about $4.73 billion. Petrol gas, about $1 billion. Fertilizer, about $200 million. Lead, about $75 million. Cocoa and cocoa products, about $32 million. Oil seed and fruit, about $15 million. Plastic product, about $9 million. Fruit, about $7 million. Edible fruit and nut, about $7 million. And article of iron and steel, about $6 million, and fish and crustacean about $6 million. Now, when I look at the data for each of these products, these are low-hanging fruits. And what you said is very important in the sense that since majority of this trade is actually crude oil, that's why I said my optimism is with caution. It's with cautious optimism. And the reason why I'm having a cautious optimism is I know we still have some things and challenge to grapple with locally. And that's why, sincerely, I'm surprised that till now, I'm not hearing some conversation I think we should be having about this. I think there's some conversation I'm expecting Nigeria to be having right now on this. Is it good for us? Is it not good for us? If it's good for us, what can we do to leverage? I'm not hearing that conversation. Because if you look at the data, you realize that crude oil alone, among the about $6.5 billion Nigerian export to the US, 75% is crude oil. 75% is crude oil. 15% is gas. 75% crude oil, 15% gas. That's about 90%. So that's why your concern is still valid, very, very valid. The fact that we need to do something about this, else we might have a challenge. But let me tell you the good side that makes me to seems like we have an advantage. Look at this. Who are those that export crude oil to the US? Currently, major source of crude oil import, US import $170 billion crude oil. 57% is from Canada. 20% is from Mexico. Canada and Mexico rate is 25% tariff. So Canada and Mexico are not competitive in the US right now. Who are other people that export? Saudi Arabia is about 6.3%. Brazil is about 3%. Nigeria is about 3%. Apart from Saudi and Iraq, who are at about 10% in terms of the tariff, Nigeria is 14%. So I see opportunity for crude oil export for Nigeria and Saudi Arabia. But like you said, if you don't ramp up the production of crude oil, there's still stealing and diversion. If NMPC is still pledging this product and doing swap such that we are not getting enough, such that the good is being used as collateral for our loan, in as much as these two goods, sincerely, I think it's a good one for Nigeria, but we won't be able to take advantage of that if we don't solve the problem you mentioned.
I'm looking at how the global trade, the global economies are reacting to this tariffs across global trade. I saw a couple of minutes ago how the U.S. stock market had reacted very negatively. It was all negative all through today's trading in the U.S. I don't know if this really sounds good for America as a country itself.
I don't think so, because although according to Trump and some of the research from the country, they are saying that there might be initial pain. And that is expected, because if I'm reporting from China before and you are charging duty of probably less than 10%, and now you are telling China to pay 34%, the implication of that is that the importer will simply pass on the cost to the consumers. In fact, housing is expected to increase. Cost of housing is expected to increase in the US because most of the houses are built with wood, and the lumber used is from Canada. Canada is a major supplier of lumber to the US, and now there is a tariff on Canada, and Canada has imposed a counter tariff, and that means importing those lumber from Canada will be very expensive. Now that is going to increase the cost of housing in the US. So the consumers in the US, the populace in the US, they are even protesting right now, they're not going to find it funny. But Trump is saying, since the announcement, they've had over $1 trillion pledge of different businesses who is coming to set up in America. So that's why I feel it's a temporary pain. But for the American people and for businesses who have to import some of these raw materials to produce in the US, a number of them are not finding it funny. A number of companies in the US who produce outside of the US are going to have challenge right now. And a number of them, like Apple, have pledged over $1 trillion to come and invest and begin to produce its phone in the United States.
Big concerns that this would raise. So let's come back home to Nigeria, and in closing, what should Nigeria be doing at this point in time? We've had this conversation about the need to diversify the nation's economy, the non-oil sector, but then we seem to have paid huge lip service to that conversation. What should we be doing if we can harness any potential coming from these increase?
Number one, we need to identify those products that Nigeria have as low-hanging fruit that we currently produce and export to the US. And the reason I'm particularly interested in products currently going to the US is because that means our quality is good for the US market. We have certification for the US market. The price, even right now, to some extent, are competitive. That's why we're getting buyer. Now we should be more competitive than our competitor. So we should identify those products and focus on them. But more importantly, is the fact that the government must step in and ensure that the port is more efficient in such a way that we can now reduce the cost of shipment to the US. Because that's where I see a problem. The cost of shipment to the US is high, sometimes almost $2,000. Why? Because not many vessels coming to Nigeria is going to the US. Because we have a big issue right now with delay we have at our port, not entering the port, the vessel coming in, and a lot of issues around the port management itself. And that can be a challenge. So port efficiency becomes extremely important. The government must strengthen NEPC at this time. NEPC must do a road show in the US. We must go for trade mission in the US. We must now publicize what we are capable of offering the US that will now be cheaper than other counterparts where they are getting it from, because the tariff is now to our advantage. That is what I see. But more importantly is that Nigeria must increase its number of exporters. Export readiness is a big challenge. Nigeria does not have up to 1,500 exporters. US have over 300,000. UK, with the population that is a third of Nigerian population, has over 100,000 exporters. Nigeria do not have up to 1,500 registered exporters. So which is the issue we had with AGOA. We might still not be able to take advantage of this opportunity if we don't get ready to be able to take advantage by increasing the number of exporter, capacity building, support for businesses to be able to trade in this market.
Fantastic, Babidele, fantastic. I know there are a lot of bottlenecks to exporting in Nigeria, but then, like you did say, government should focus a lot more attention on increasing the number of exporters, ramp up production going forward. Dr. Babidele Yebami, thank you so very much for your time with us on the show. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
All right.